They're whispering your name like it's a curse. Not because you cast spells, but because you broke the rules without ever touching a book. You move differently, think sharper, and that terrifies the ones who built their identity on rituals, illusions, and borrowed power. They can't explain you, so they mythologize you. Call it forbidden. Call it dark. Call it magic. But here's the truth they'll never admit out loud. You didn't steal power, you remembered it. While they chant and hide behind symbols, you operate from instinct, discipline, and silence. And that kind of power, it doesn't need candles or circles. It walks into the room and rewrites reality without asking permission. They never saw it coming, did they? The way you slip through their nets, the way you move in shadows they thought they owned. They build their little kingdoms, their fragile empires of fear and superstition, and they assume everyone bows, everyone trembles, everyone plays by the rules they carved into stone. But then you appear, and suddenly the ground under their feet is unstable. They look at you and feel something they've never felt before. Unease, dread, the prickling of their own insignificance. It's not just your actions. It's the energy you carry, the way you exist in the world like a storm waiting to break. They sense it before they see it. Every gesture you make, every choice you take, every quiet step you leave behind in the chaos. They misread it, they overthink it, they whisper about it in corners and shadowed halls. They can't pin you down. You are not in their rules, not in their rituals, not in their books of forbidden knowledge. They panic because they realize you're untouchable in ways they'll never understand. Their spells, their charms, their warnings, they fail to bind you, fail to control you, fail to define you. You are the anomaly in their orderly little world, and that terrifies them more than any fire, any hex, any curse they could ever muster. And isn't that delicious? The way fear spreads in whispers, the way their eyes follow you like they're expecting the impossible to happen at any moment. The way they clutch on to every superstition as though it could explain you. But you're not explainable. You're not measurable. You are a movement, a presence, a force that doesn't ask for permission and doesn't negotiate with weakness. You take what is yours not with violence, not with deceit, not with noise, but with precision, with instinct, with clarity. They think power comes in symbols and rituals, but power is a pulse, a rhythm, a certainty in the chaos. Look at them. Watch their fear manifest in every glance, every hesitation, every muttered warning. They sense the distance between their illusions and your reality, and it gnaws at them. You don't need to speak, to shout, to prove. You exist, and that existence is enough to fracture the fragile constructs they've spent lifetimes building. You walk into a room and the air shifts. They feel it. Their confidence shivers. Their sense of control crumbles. They call it magic, forbidden magic, because admitting the truth, that you are untamed, that you are beyond their understanding, would mean dismantling their entire identity. And no witch, no sorcerer, no master of shadows is ready for that kind of honesty. And therein lies the irony. They seek power in circles, in chance, in secrecy. You seek nothing. You need nothing. You move like the inevitable, and everything they've built to define dominance, to enforce fear, to maintain superiority, melts in the presence of someone who doesn't acknowledge the rules. They fear your gaze because it sees the truth they refuse to confront. The truth that the world bends not to those who cling to illusions, but to those who embody certainty, audacity, and raw, unfiltered awareness. Every step you take echoes louder than any incantation they recite. Every calm breath you draw in the chaos is louder than their frantic plotting. Every refusal to conform, every choice to rise above, every quiet domination of circumstances, they perceive as spells, as dark arts, as forbidden forces they could never comprehend, because they are trapped in the illusion of control, in the smallness of fear, in the desperation of trying to hold on to meaning where there is none. And the more they try to categorize you, the more they attempt to understand, the deeper they fall into confusion, into awe, into terror of what they cannot touch, cannot bind, cannot own. They don't understand you, and that's what terrifies them most. Every time they try to categorize you, to pin a label, to force an explanation onto your existence, they fail. You see, humans have always feared what they can't comprehend. That's why they invented rules, rituals, codes, and boundaries. To contain reality, to tame it, to make it manageable. But you are not manageable. You are not contained. You slip between their fingers, move through their barriers, and thrive in spaces they've deemed impossible. And when they can't grasp you, when their logic collapses, when their neat little boxes shatter, they call it forbidden, dangerous, unnatural. They talk about magic like it's something they control, like it's a commodity that can be bought, stolen, or bartered. But real power, real influence, doesn't require candles, potions, or chance. It requires awareness, precision, audacity, and a fearless understanding of cause and effect. You operate with a clarity that terrifies them because they can't replicate it. They see your actions, your strategy, your subtle manipulations of reality, and they panic. They whisper in dark rooms. They gather in circles. They attempt to summon forces to explain the unexplainable. But you are the anomaly they cannot touch, the equation they cannot solve, the phenomenon they cannot predict. And so, in their fear, they brand you forbidden, cursed, unholy, dangerous. The irony is exquisite. While they waste lifetimes trying to mimic power through symbols and theatrics, you embody it naturally. You don't perform for validation. You don't seek applause. You don't need recognition. Your power is a byproduct of your presence, your choices, your refusal to be less than what you are. And that refusal, that sheer unwillingness to bend to their expectations, it terrifies them more than anything they could ever conjure. Because deep down, they know their rituals are hollow, their rules meaningless. And when someone walks through the chaos with calm, with mastery, with absolute certainty, it reveals the void they've been hiding behind. They try to rationalize it. They try to convince themselves that you're cheating, that you're hiding some secret, that there's a forbidden force guiding you. They can't accept that your power comes from something they will never possess: self, possession, clarity, and the audacity to defy the world's illusions without fear or apology. Every time you act, every time you rise, every time you refuse to conform, they feel it in their bones. The ground shifts beneath them, and they're powerless to stop it. They whisper, they plot, they curse, but nothing can erase the reality that you exist outside their definitions. And oh, how they fear it. Not because you've taken something from them, not because you've invaded their territory, but because you expose the truth. They've been playing with shadows while you are the storm. They've been reading rules while you are rewriting reality. They've been bound by fear while you dance above it. Every glance they steal, every shiver that runs down their spine, every frantic effort to make sense of your presence. It's proof. Proof that the real power doesn't lie in tradition, in secrecy, in titles or incantations. It lies in being untouchable in mind, body, and spirit, in moving with intent and clarity, in embracing the chaos and bending it to your will without anyone else even realizing it. And so, in their desperation to explain, they invent stories. They paint you as forbidden. They whisper that you wield some unnatural force. They cling to superstition like a life raft because admitting the truth, that your power is innate, conscious, unstoppable, would dismantle everything they've ever believed about control, about hierarchy, about dominance. And you don't have to fight. You just exist. You just move. You just are. And that, more than any spell, any ritual, any curse they can summon, terrifies them utterly. They think power has a ceremony, a beginning, a permission slip signed by tradition, authority, or some dusty rule book guarded by people who've never actually held power themselves. They believe strength must be granted, approved, initiated through symbols and obedience, and that belief keeps them comfortable, safe, predictable, until you show up and shatter the fantasy without even trying, because you don't wait to be chosen. You don't kneel. You don't ask. You take a step forward, and the world adjusts around you, and that alone is enough to make their systems glitch. They look for your initiation marks, your credentials, your rituals. They expect to find a master behind you, a ceremony you passed, a secret order you belong to. But there's nothing. No candles burned, no vows sworn, no permission granted. Just you, moving with certainty, acting with precision, operating with a calm that feels offensive to people addicted to hierarchy. And that's when panic sets in. Because if power doesn't require permission, then everything they sacrificed themselves to obey was a lie. You see, rituals aren't about power. They're about control. About keeping people waiting, dependent, obedient. About convincing them that authority lives somewhere outside themselves. And you break that illusion simply by existing as proof of the opposite. You don't follow their steps. Don't repeat their words. Don't mimic their symbols. You move from instinct sharpened by awareness, discipline forged in silence, and decisions made without fear of approval. They call that reckless, dangerous, forbidden. But deep down, they recognize it for what it is, freedom. And freedom terrifies people who built their identity on obedience. They watch you bypass gates they were told could only be opened from the inside. They see you operate without validation, without ceremony, without blessing, and it rattles them. Because if you didn't need permission, then maybe they never did either. And that realization is far more dangerous than any spell, any weapon, any rebellion. It's the kind of thought that collapses entire belief systems from the inside out. They accuse you of cheating the system, of breaking rules you were never meant to touch, of using shortcuts that don't exist. They need to believe that, because the alternative, that power can be embodied rather than bestowed, would mean their sacrifices were pointless. Their waiting was unnecessary. Their obedience was self-inflicted. And so they double down on their rituals, clutch their symbols tighter, repeat their chants louder, hoping noise can drown out the truth you represent just by breathing in the same space as them. But here's what they don't understand. You didn't reject permission out of rebellion. You rejected it because it was irrelevant. Because real power doesn't ask. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek approval from systems designed to dilute it. It moves. It acts. It adapts. And the moment you internalize that, the moment you stopped waiting for a signal to begin, you became something they can't control, can't predict, can't initiate or exile. They feel it when you walk past their barriers untouched, when their authority fails to register on you, when their rules bounce off your indifference. They sense that you're operating on a different frequency, one that doesn't respond to fear or reverence. And that's when the whispers start. That's when they decide you must be dangerous, that you must be using something forbidden, because the idea that someone could be powerful without permission threatens the very foundation of every system they rely on to feel important. You don't need their ceremonies, because you are the event. You don't need their approval, because you already decided. You don't need their rituals, because your discipline is stronger than their symbols. And every second you continue to move unapologetically, every moment you act without waiting, you expose the uncomfortable truth they've spent their lives avoiding. That power was never granted. It was always claimed. They tremble at your calm, not your anger, not your chaos, not your spectacle, but your calm. The kind of calm that doesn't apologize, doesn't explain, doesn't negotiate. They clutch their spells, their charms, their symbols, thinking the noise, the theatrics, the ceremonies will protect them from someone who doesn't need any of it. They don't realize the quiet is louder than any shout, the stillness sharper than any blade, the absence of fear more contagious than any curse they could summon. Because you don't need to prove anything, and that terrifies them. Every glance you cast, every step you take, every silent decision you make ripples through the fragile illusions they've built. They watch, they whisper, they panic, because they sense you exist outside their rules, outside their definitions, outside the boundaries they've devoted their lives to preserving. And that scares them more than any force they can conjure, because you are unpredictable in a way they can't categorize. You don't follow scripts. You don't wait for permission. You don't seek approval. You just are, and that being is enough to unravel everything they thought they controlled. Power, true power, doesn't need ritual, doesn't need ceremony, doesn't need validation. It is presence, audacity, instinct, and discipline condensed into a force that moves silently, but strikes inevitably. They call it forbidden because they can't replicate it, can't manipulate it, can't own it. They label what they cannot comprehend in their fear, and every whispered accusation, every frantic warning, every frantic attempt to conjure explanations is just proof that you are untouchable in ways they'll never achieve. They operate in chaos disguised as order, in noise disguised as wisdom, in rituals disguised as control. You operate in clarity disguised as calm, in intent disguised as simplicity, in discipline disguised as instinct. And the difference terrifies them. Because while they are trapped in their own illusions, waiting for signs, symbols, permissions, confirmations, you are moving forward without asking, without seeking, without hesitation. And that is a language they cannot read, a rhythm they cannot follow, a force they cannot resist. They try to rationalize it. They tell themselves there must be a hidden hand, a secret force, a forbidden tool guiding your success. They clutch their beliefs like a lifeline, whispering warnings, spreading rumors, convincing themselves that if they can't replicate you, they must demonize you. They call it unnatural, forbidden, cursed. They fear your presence because it exposes their emptiness. Their power is borrowed, yours is embodied. Their authority is fragile, yours is inevitable. And they know it. They sense it in the space you occupy, in the calm you radiate, in the quiet dominance you wield without ceremony or spectacle. And oh, how they panic. Not because you've harmed them, not because you've stolen from them, not because you've challenged them directly, but because you exist in a way they cannot control. Every step you take, every decision you make, every calm breath you draw exposes the weakness they've masked behind rituals and symbols and traditions. They hate that they are powerless against something they cannot touch, cannot explain, cannot command. They fear that the power you wield is impossible to contain, impossible to manipulate, impossible to suppress. They whisper about forbidden magic, forbidden power, cursed force, dangerous influence. But all it really is you. Your discipline, your clarity, your audacity, your presence. And the cruelest truth is that you don't need to fight, to prove, to manipulate, to bend, to deceive. You simply exist in your power. And that existence, that quiet dominance, that untouchable presence is enough to dismantle every illusion they've built, every rule they've followed, every spell they've recited, and every belief they've clung to as proof of their importance. They panic because they recognize it, even if they won't admit it. They sense the gap between what they think is possible and what you embody. They see a reality they cannot access, a force they cannot influence, a truth they cannot deny. And that realization, the awareness that you do not need them, that you do not fear them, that you do not wait for them, that you do not bend for them, that you are untouchable in the ways that truly matter, terrifies them more than any curse, any spell, any ritual ever could.